So we'll begin in a couple of minutes, but before we begin, is there any questions I can help answer? Any questions come up in the?
I thought it was.
Section 4?
I thought it was the easiest part of the book.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I did.
It finally got easier, huh?
Finally, and I understood that better.
Great.
And I also read the chapters in Revelations.
Okay.
I didn't understand that too well.
Well, you're in good company there.
And would you review for me one word again? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Agency.
So agency is.
Came up again in this book.
Yeah, so I think a working definition of agency is the ability to make decisions for yourself while understanding and being responsible for the consequences.
Yeah, I could remember responsibility, but I needed more. Thank you.
Yeah, because I mean, and that's the debate is, when do we recognize that we understand responsibility? You know, a 13-year-old may or may not. You know, I think if you've ever had a teenager in your life, when you ask a question like, why did you do that? And they answer you, I don't know. They're really being honest. They're not being evasive. And, you know, what's interesting about teenage brains in particular is, and I think it's the hippocampus, I'm not sure about that, but the part of the brain that processes long-term consequences hasn't developed yet. And so what happens, particularly, so when a young person knows someone who dies, an adult will have a completely different reaction than a teenager. An adult will react to that and say, oh, life is precious, you know, kind of like what we read in chapter 12. Life is precious. We need to make every day count. The teenage brain will turn the exact opposite way, and life is meaningless, we're all going to die, because they don't have that long-term consequence part of their brain fully developed yet. And so the number of times I've been regrettably called into schools after an unexpected death of a student or a staff member, I try to work with staff to help them understand that a really common response to death for teenagers is nothing matters. It just kind of turns into this nihilism, which is not what most adults would respond. So
My husband had 2 handicapped children, and they did not know cause and effect at all.
Yeah.
And the example is that his brother died, and we made a big deal that we'd get together and see him and tell him that John passed away. And we didn't know what to expect, but what we got was, are we gonna have pizza for dinner?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just didn't connect at all. And he never asked about it ever again.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
But they don't
I heard
know
you.
any cause and effect. They don't know if they walk in the middle of the street that they're might get hit by a car. It doesn't exist.
Okay.
All right.
I hear you. I
So
believe you.
there we go. So we've made it all the way to week 4, which is fantastic. And part 4 is called Facing the Limits. We're going to do things a little bit what you've kind of grown accustomed to in Lent. We're going to change the order. We're going to reflect on the question last instead of first. But we're going to basically just go in order with the 4 chapters. Chapter 9, when we inevitably botch it, and we'll have a personal reflection, so you may or may not share, but you don't have to. And a small group reflection. We'll tackle chapter 10, when life hurts. We'll have a partner discussion there. For chapter 11, and there's no fixing it, group discussion. And then chapter 12, when it ends, we'll do a partner discussion. So the next question I ask is, for when it comes to part 4, was it as bad as I warned it could be last week. So, was this section more, and I guess a follow-up to that is, was this section more or less emotionally provocative than earlier sections of the book? And if it is or isn't, why do you think that might be? But let's start with the, was it as bad as I made it out to be last week?
Yes.
No.
Okay, yes and no.
I
So,
don't think it's
Jerry, what did it stir up for you?
It was a very emotional
Okay,
time for me, reading these chapters. I spent a lot of time and reflection, and it brought up a lot of pain.
okay. Sorry to hear that. Yeah. Did my warning help or did it make it worse?
I think your warning, it didn't make it worse, but I would anticipate it,
Okay,
that it wouldn't be an easy read.
yeah,
And for the most part, it just wasn't.
yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Anyone online, some reactions or how did part 4 go for those of you online? Left you speechless, huh?
Matt, this is Cindy. I appreciated the warning. It certainly didn't make it worse. For me, for whatever reason, it wasn't particularly emotional. I'm not entirely certain why, but I didn't find it difficult.
Okay. Thanks for sharing, Cindy. Appreciate it. All right, anyone else in the room? Did it feel more or less emotionally provocative? Or kind of on the same lines as what we had been reading through?
I didn't think it was more. I didn't,
Okay.
you know, I've only had 4 months and a half since Al left me. It was emotional, but I didn't think it was that bad. No.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it hits all of us a little bit differently, so, but thanks for sharing. All right. Got like 16 windows to navigate now, I feel like, so, all right. How many of us can say that we are practically perfect in every way and have never made a mistake? So, how many of us are a little bit like my dear friend Mary Poppins?
Not I, but I know a lot of people who think so.
Well, that's true.
They think you are, they are.
No, I don't know. Well, that's true.
Whether or not they actually are, we can sometimes help judge for people who think they've never made a mistake. So,
Right.
chapter 9 obviously begins with the premise that we are not Mary Poppins and that from time to time we have not been practically perfect in every way. I think what was most provocative for me was this quote from page 155. Being wrong without realizing it feels exactly the same as being right.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we struggle with when we see acquaintances who are wrong but don't know it. And so the book continues, that's the trouble. The same with doing wrong. If we don't realize it, doing the wrong thing feels the same as doing anything else. We're just doing what we do, living as we live, and there's a serious danger here. We can have good values, maybe even the right values, and be mindlessly living out of step with or even in direct opposition to what we take to be worthy of our humanity. And so I thought maybe the best starting question as we react to chapter 9 is, and we don't have to share this with a partner right now, so this can just kind of be a personal reflection. Think about a time in which you found out or realized that you did get something wrong. So this is kind of you were at, it wasn't I did something and I immediately knew it was wrong perhaps, but I had been doing something and then it kind of dawned on me. How did you find out that you were making a mistake or had made a mistake? Was it a close friend or a partner who kind of alerted you to that fact? Was it a moment of realization that you experienced on your own? But let's take a minute or two and think about a time in which not only did we make a mistake, but then we realized we made a mistake. How did we come to that understanding?
For me, I'm trying to get rid of the guilt, realizing how many mistakes I made. Unintentionally, but in retrospect, they were really bad choices. And also, I did a lot of denial stuff when I was raising my kids. I didn't realize it until a lot later. So, yeah, it made me feel really rotten.
Okay, so it felt rotten.
Yeah, rotten. I mean, how I acted towards my parents during hard times, just the things I said and did were all terrible. And I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I didn't say, I'm setting out here to do something terrible or say the wrong thing.
Right. So, could you guys hear that online okay? Is the new mic working okay? Great. Yeah, I think that's a perfect illustration of what the book draws our attention to is there are presumably many, many times in which we don't intend to do wrong or be a jerk or be nasty, but despite that, we still can act in it. So. The follow-up, does anybody else feel comfortable sharing a little bit about what it felt like to realize we were wrong? How many of us realized ourselves we were wrong? And how did we come to that conclusion? Was it guilt? Was it regret? Was it
Regret.
regret?
Regret, and it was with one of my best friends. And we had a schism,
Mm.
and she died, and I have never been able to, make things better.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
It's stupid women stuff. No, it was. But there was jealousy,
Yeah.
and then retorts back and forth, and I mean, it was, and a broken friendship after many, many years. The whole thing was terrible, and I do regret it. I don't feel too guilty, though. I got it.
Okay. Yeah, no, they can be separate emotions.
I didn't, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say it, but I didn't start the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm allowed to say that or not, but I think so. And I had people to back me up, so.
Okay.
But it's terrible. It's terrible. And how do you feel? You feel terrible because you didn't want it that way at all, at least if you cared.
Thanks for sharing, brother. Patty, were you going to say something?
No, I was back, actually, changed my mind, but I find really interesting is my answer was going to be through maturity, looking back, and then
Okay.
guilt.
Yes.
However, I think that there's a distinction between regret and guilt.
Okay, say more.
Well, I think that guilt is a little bit self-indulgent, right? You don't necessarily have to do anything with it. But if you regret an action, I think that puts you in a position to make better decisions later. Maybe it's semantics,
Okay.
but
You hold back.
I like that distinction between the two.
So
Restraint.
to kind of skip forward a little bit to chapter 10, so did the Buddhist approach to what we might call sin, did that kind of resonate with you? Because to me, I hear echoes of that. I remember, maybe, is it chapter 11?
It's in there, I forget where.
It's somewhere
And-
here.
And it resonated with me, in part because I've taken a lot of yoga, right,
Okay.
for 30 some
Oh, no,
years.
it's right, it is chapter 9. So
Okay,
yeah.
And it's funny, it resonated with me, and then reading it here though, I don't say I struggled with it, I saw fault as well.
Okay,
Yes, of
So,
course.
where before, I think some of the things you just take it at surface level.
Yeah.
You know, and this made me go a little bit deeper.
that's heartwarming to know. We're doing the work, here for Life Worth Living. Appreciate it, so. How many of us had an experience where we were alerted to our not awesomeness?
Yeah.
Care to share anything about that, or?
Yeah, I was at my daughter's a couple of weeks ago, and she didn't particularly like her behaviour, a whole lot. She lost her husband last year, so she's been a little bit tricky to deal with for the last year, but I went down to see her, went with my husband to go down and see her, and my feelings were very hurt because we had made an appointment. We had a massage together or something like that. Well, that didn't happen. Then she told me in the morning, I think it was on Saturday, she was going to her dance class. And I wasn't necessarily, she didn't say I was invited, I was not invited. So I felt a little bit hurt that she was going to this dance class. Anyway, and then she told me in the afternoon she was going to be going to a clothes swap with some friends of hers. I also wasn't invited, and I felt really hurt and left out. And I asked her if I could go. I asked her if I could go to the dance thing, and she didn't say anything, so I decided that probably wasn't a good idea. But the other thing, I said, could I join you? But she didn't say yes. So right there, I thought, I probably shouldn't have asked that. Anyway, later on she came and she said, if you want to come, I'm going to. So I went with her and had actually a great time, and I ended up getting some clothes that she was giving away. I took them because I like them. And I had a good conversation with some friends of hers, and then a friend who was talking to me said, oh, I really like talking to your mum. I really enjoyed that. And she said, oh, well, you can have her if you like. And the friend said, oh,
We can't hear.
We
oh, I'm
can't hear
No one
you.
can hear you
sorry.
louder.
To do that. My daughter said, I was talking to a friend of my daughter's, and she said, I really enjoyed talking with your mum. Had a good conversation. It's a clothes swap that she hadn't invited me to. And so when this woman said to me, I really enjoyed talking to your mum, my daughter said, oh, well, you can have her. And so the friend of hers said, oh, you don't mean that. And I said, yes, she does. So it was all really tricky, and I felt very confused. My feelings were really hurt. She's not a great one to show a lot of physical affection either. So I was relating this to my sponsor. I was sponsoring the 12-step recovery program, and I was telling her about my hurt. About my hurt feelings, and she just listened to me. And then she said, "Did she invite you?" And I said, "No." I kind of invited myself, and she said, "Well, you undermined her." And when she said that to me, it hit something that was like, "Oh, I really did step across a line." My daughter has quite strong boundaries, and I stopped right there. And I didn't like hearing that, but I was able to get past that. It took me about, and during the next week, and I saw her last week, and I was able to say, I'm sorry if I was a bit needy and I was a bit pushy last week. I didn't mean to be. And she accepted that. But it was a very uncomfortable feeling. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt regret,
Yes.
you said.
What was the thing that you invited yourself to?
Oh, my daughter was going to a dance class in the morning, and we'd driven down just to see her.
Oh,
So you had already gone, she knew you were coming to
She
visit.
knew we were coming. Yes.
Well,
She knew we were coming.
How old is your daughter, please? How old is
55.
How much?
50, she's 55. I would say she's old enough to know better, but
Yes, I would.
that's her problem.
She has agency.
Yes, that's right.
There you go.
well, and let alone talk that way to her mother.
That's right.
And
know?
especially if you drove down there and she was expecting you.
Right.
You'd think she would clear the calendar or
I would
something,
have thought so.
or have you be part of it.
That's pretty rude.
That is insulting.
But that's when I got the idea that I had overstepped my boundaries, because we actually invited ourselves down.
No, I don't
Wasn't
think so. I don't
She
think so.
didn't invite us.
No.
So I felt, I had pushed them. But anyway, it was a wake-up call for me, and I apologized, and it was fine, and she was a lot more solicitous the next time. So,
Well, I think it also, the particulars are instructive, but I think the other thing that's helpful for us is how valuable sponsors or therapists can be to kind of be a non-reactive
right.
helper in understanding, did I step over the boundaries or is this their problem? And, I think most trained therapists and sponsors that have some experience are not going to be the universal cheerleaders. You've never done anything wrong, you're Mary Poppins. They might occasionally side with us, or they might occasionally like, oh, you know what, let's think about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
It was helpful anyway.
people, some non-reactive and non-judgmental voices in our life are wonderful things to cultivate. So,
So a friend of mine introduced me to a woman he was with, and I met her for the first time, just by the first name, and I said, "Oh, is that your mother?"
Oh.
And it was an older woman dating a younger man,
Mm-hmm.
and she looked at me and she said, "You should know that." Oh. And did I, wow, learn never to make those assumptions. It was like, oh my God,
I got
do you apologize?
I think we need manners taught or something to people.
Well, I thought I had good manners.
I mean, no.
She should. You should know better. No, this is my girlfriend. Oh,
Don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to.
that's right. Good advice.
That's good.
Thank you.
Well, that's what lawyers say.
That's right.
thanks for sharing. What I'm trying to do is
Yes.
use the camera to highlight people, and I think all I'm doing is making people at home motion sick, so I apologize. Cindy's looking a little bit woozy, so, all right. Dee, you had something?
I only thought of this because you mentioned parents, and you talk about something, this was I just figured it out, 65 years ago. And I can feel it today as I did 65 years ago, exactly the same emotion. And it was in our old house in Sacramento, grew up there. We have a fabulous family. I've never been in trouble in my life, really. I mean, I was that goody-goody, that really didn't get in trouble. Never been hit, never been hit. And I walked into the kitchen, I was 15, I walked into the kitchen, my mom said something, I said, "What?" Like that, "What?" My father was standing right next to me. He slapped me across the face. And like I said, I don't think I've ever been spanked, nothing. And I was in a state of shock. I was just emotionally shocked. And he looked at me, and he was a loving, beautiful man. And he looked at me and he said, "You will never talk to your mother in that tone again." And I can guarantee you, I have never talked to my mother. But it was one of those things that it made such an impact on his response and my response that to this day, I could feel it. I could feel it. And I was so wrong. But did I think I was wrong? No. I was just, "What, Mom?" Like,
It's kind of normal for
that teen, what? But now, and then maybe it was because my brain wasn't totally developed and I didn't know the consequences.
So you have an excuse.
justified now, right?
Thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate that. It's to share those vulnerabilities is not a small thing. I wonder if for a moment we could kind of break into groups of 2 or 3, and for those friends online, we'll sort you into some small groups. Some of our monotheistic traditions, and I think by that we generally mean the Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, see guilt as a key component in the process of responding appropriately to failure. On the other hand, the Buddhist perspective taught by Pema Chodron suggests that guilt is a problem, not a help. And so the question is what do we think? Do we find guilt helpful or unhelpful? Or could it even be an obstacle to the process of addressing failure? So in groups of 2 or 3, why don't you guys break in? We'll spend just a couple minutes talking about, is guilt helpful or unhelpful?
My ex-wife and I, we knew raising our child.
I'm ready for the question.
The premier Catholic high school had graduates, among others, Chris Evert, the tennis player, Michael Irvin, the Hall of Fame football player. This was the kind of school. My wife was born Catholic. I attended Mass for 45 years. Yes. And so we had our son go to the high school to take an entrance exam. It wasn't, he didn't have a choice. We wanted him to take it. Now, how he did is up to him. And a couple of weeks went by, and we didn't hear it. So finally, Joanne called the school. It turns out he didn't. He just sat through it. And so we knew raising him that we were, we never got into his business or anything, to understand. He was private, proud, very capable, very smart, but things would occur. Like the other day, we mailbox,
So
obviously,
I've
he
been retired for 20
pissed
years.
off one of his friends. Yeah, but push came to shove, to find out what things charged for drug-related felony.
People under me.
Yeah, and it's too late. There's no book you can read. There's no school you can go to. How to deal with it.
I
It's
choose
real life.
the best option. I chose the appropriate option. I didn't have to do that, but, I think about, okay, well, that person, now why am I thinking about that 20, 25 years after? I don't know.
So let's take about 1 more minute to share. Do we find
He went what's called level 6.
guilt helpful?
If you walk away, you're gonna go level 8.
Both, but I have regret a couple of cases. Could have done something.
Nancy, are you also on your
You
iPad?
had to have kids make their beds and so forth. He got away from us, he learned responsibility, and it changed his whole life. Now he's with the same company
I'm sorry.
for 20 years.
Yeah.
But it wasn't any of our doing.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
No. He had nothing to do with his success. It was all him. Granted, there's some DNA, but there wasn't anything we did. You don't feel shame, guilty that
Nothingness.
it got to this.
How do your mother happen to read for 15 years?
Yeah, there was a lot of other.
As well as, as well as many other couples.
Very simple.
I mean, people around us thought we were the perfect couple. Entertaining.
He would know if it was.
Well, that's, but that surfaced later. Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, I'm so sorry online, guys. It is just. All right.
Okay.
So let's start with our friends online. How did we find guilt helpful or not helpful?
Maybe it was.
Yep, Janet, thanks for sharing.
So Matt, I was in a room with Cheryl and Nancy's iPad too, and there was nobody there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. I apologize. We'll do bigger small groups next time. So I apologize.
No problem.
Well,
So,
we had a great
We
small.
got, oh yeah. Thanks, Debbie. What do you
we
guys?
we had a great small group. I think what we agreed is that short-term guilt can be positive. It motivates us to do something, but guilt that lingers is not helpful. Is that what we agreed? Yeah.
Okay.
Persistent guilt.
And can you raise your hand?
Oh, I think it's totally not helpful.
Totally not helpful.
Yeah. I think when something goes wrong, you need to figure out how to fix it.
Okay.
Not feel bad about it.
Not okay.
How do you fix something that's really
Things can.
cruel? My father, I was brought up Episcopalian, my father was Catholic, and he got excommunicated because I wasn't brought up Catholic. And so I spent my life thinking that I was going to send my father to hell. Now, that's a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd become a Catholic, that I could save my father from purgatory or wherever it is they send him. And it distances me, and I tried to become a Catholic, and it just didn't work. I was brought up Episcopalian. I've always been an Episcopalian. And so I went ahead and stayed where I was. But that guilt, every time I think of my father's ashes, I think, where is he? And so it's one thing to say, get rid of it, but how do you get rid of it? Huh?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't think you do. I think it just stays with you forever.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I think forgiveness becomes part of it, and I think you can. It's what.
I think you have to cut yourself a little slack.
Yeah, but I think you also need to. There's also institutional forgiveness. You have to forgive the church for making you. You have to forgive the church for its mistakes. And I think that is a clear example of the church making a mistake and burdening you with a guilt that you were not intended to carry and was not instructive or helpful in any way, shape, or form.
So I brought up, excuse me.
Yeah.
I brought up something that I learned in I co-facilitate grief groups. People are very sorry for what they didn't do for their mother, or how they didn't see them at the last breath, or all the childhood stuff, and Catholic Church, whatever. And this therapist that I co-facilitated with said something very succinct. Guilt, you feel guilt if it's something you intentionally did. If you didn't intentionally hurt somebody, but still feel you wish you had something done differently, that is a regret.
Yeah.
You didn't
I
give
think
your
that's a
mother
good
cancer.
one.
It was the Catholic Church. It wasn't you who did that to your father. That, you regretted that maybe, but it wasn't guilt. Not guilt. Really simple if you look at it that way.
Yeah.
Did you intentionally do to create a hurt or something awful?
Why don't you speak, Lon? Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Lon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guilt I have, my ex-wife and I were married for 43 years, so I don't need to go into that. But raising a child, maybe there are books on raising a child, but our child was very smart, very bright, but he was different. And things would happen and we didn't know how to deal with them. Like I mentioned, one day we opened the mailbox and there was a live snake inside. So obviously he had irritated one or more of his friends. But it culminated in his being arrested and charged with 4 drug-related felonies, and we knew nothing about him. And so we have guilt to this day about how did we permit this to happen? You know, and it makes me think of Columbine. Remember the dreadful shooting?
Yeah.
It makes me think of that we're just like non-existent. But, you know, he's turned his life around, but we can't claim anything positive to do with it, other than we paid $40,000 for him to go to this school where he acquired the skills he needs to do his job. And that's the only positive thing I can say. So we feel guilt to this day.
You know, the other thing that kind of weaves into this is the distinction between guilt and shame. And so guilt is when we feel bad for something we have done. It's a behavior or an action. Shame is when we are a bad person who we blame ourselves for doing something, not we blame our actions, right? And so we hold that even more deeply and closer to our egos or ourselves. When we hold that shame, it's we are bad, not that we did something bad, it's that we are bad. Which I think perhaps might be a good entree into chapter 10, which kind of helps us understand, I think I'm mixing up chapters 10, 11, in terms of personal fixes versus systemic fixes. I think that was chapter 10. Oops, there we go. There's 2 quotes that kind of stuck out to me in this chapter. The first is Baldwin, like Wilde, is convinced that a current of suffering runs through all of life, that we are fragile, lonely beings, prone to being hurt, unable to secure ourselves. But exactly because this is who we are, this vulnerable place is where our flourishing is to be found. Baldwin thinks that our tender fragility is precisely where we can find meaning, dignity, and the beauty of life. Baldwin seeks both social change and personal transformation. He knits the two tightly together. One essential part of working against suffering in the world is to work with our own suffering so that we might become the sort of people who don't inflict our pain on others. Which, for better or for worse, kind of reminds me of where we were in, I think, chapter 4, which is a human life, like many other things, is beautiful not because they last, right? We return to this quote of something is beautiful because it is impermanent. Is that what makes human life beautiful, is the question. For Baldwin, it certainly is. Baldwin wrote that life is tragic and therefore unutterly beautiful. My question, and we could do this, why don't we do this as a whole group instead of as a partner? That might save us a few minutes, because I don't want to go overtime 2 weeks in a row. Is it hard to see beauty in tragedy and suffering? And if suffering does contain beauty, does that make fighting it seem less compelling? That is I'm going to admit, a 1-2 combination of heavy philosophical questions. So let's take the first one. Do we agree that life is tragic and therefore beautiful? Do we find beauty in the tragic?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know.
Some of us, yes, some of us not convinced. We can.
Yes. I don't think it's a given.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, I would argue that beauty is fleeting.
Beauty is fleeting, okay.
Yeah, so
So human life is too by definition,
Right.
or, okay. How about folks online? Do we agree that there is beauty in tragedy, or that there can be? Cindy?
I would say yes, that there can be beauty in tragedy. I don't imagine it's always the case. But I don't know that I see life as tragic. Life has tragedy, but I don't consider it tragic.
No, I don't. I agree
Yeah,
with
we
you.
agree with you. Absolutely. I don't see any beauty in tragedy or suffering at all. I find it distressing in every way.
Could they hear you?
Yeah,
Yep,
they
yep,
can
we
hear
can
you.
Uh-huh.
Andrea, you raised a hand. Did you have something to share?
I just
Sorry.
think that there are moments that are, there's always silver linings, and there can be beauty in tragedy. I mean, almost could say in the pandemic, there were interesting silver linings in a way that was tragic for a lot of people. But I think we all got to spend more time with each other, and it's just dependent. But at times there were silver linings.
Okay. Is there a quality of suffering that, so we think it can be beautiful. What helps it be beautiful, and what keeps it ugly or distressing? Pat has a.
I think the beauty is found in how others react to the situation. So there's horrible scenes going on in Gaza right now.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, this is just an example, the World Central Kitchen, Jose Andresi. The beauty is, it's horrible. There's no beauty when you see on the ground, but there is beauty in how you see people stepping up to address it. So that's where I think you find the beauty.
I think it's also connected to tragedy, and is there any joy that one can achieve in a very tragic situation? And I found that for myself, that when my son was killed, tragically, and it was Thanksgiving, and Christmas was around the corner, and I couldn't imagine, my world had stopped, so I just couldn't possibly see that anything was good. And then my daughter came to visit, and she brought us 2 tiny kittens, because she said we needed some new life in our house. And those kittens actually gave me joy in a horrible situation, but they truly, and they have had such meaning to me. They're gone, they are gone too now, but I can't say enough about those 2 cats.
Ben and Sam.
What were the names?
Ben and Sam.
Ben and Sam. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do think you can find beauty,
Yeah.
obviously, in the most tragic of situations. I didn't ever expect that to happen for me, but it did.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing. It's amazing. Little things.
Thank you for sharing.
The statement that was on the screen there.
Yeah.
It says life is tragic.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. Life is not
Okay.
tragic, but life contains, each of our lives contain many tragedies.
Yeah.
But life itself isn't tragic, and most of, if we're,
Unless you let it be.
if we dwell on it, then it is tragic.
Matt, isn't Baldwin a black man?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what, he has a different opinion because he says in his writing that, and if you know anything about his life, I mean, he had some run-ins constantly because of his color.
Yes.
That's a different lifestyle that we may be, that we've never had to handle. And so he formed these opinions. I don't blame him in the least bit. So I think that statement of life is tragic, maybe for him, but not for a lot of us here. And I think that's what you're saying, that life is not tragic. But that man went through some very difficult times, that he was after something when he got into some of the altercations that he went through.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
I don't see the beauty in tragedy. I'm sorry. I have had two in my lifetime, and my granddaughter and my husband, and I don't see any beauty in it at all.
Yeah.
I understand, and the kindness and everything you get later on. Well, of course, I mean that's just good people, good human. But I don't like that statement. Okay?
Yeah. Well, there's perhaps the opportunity to find comfort in that this is a question that has not only perplexed humanity for millennia, but Scripture too has tried to struggle with. I don't think I've told this story yet, but you'll hear it several times during my rectorate, so buckle up and get used to it. So when I was a second year in seminary, I took a class on the art and architecture of the afterlife and the apocalypse. We called it Quad A. And it basically was looking at some of the apocalyptic literature of the Bible, so the book of Revelation in the New Testament, Daniel in the Old Testament, and a few of the prophets. But what will the end of the world look like according to Scripture? And so for the final project in that class, I examined what does the apocalypse look like in film. And so I was looking at movies like Terminator and Terminator 2, Ghostbusters for kind of science fiction. There's the great Gregory Peck movie On the Beach,
Yes.
which imagines that the Soviet Union and the United States have exchanged nuclear weapons. And he, as an Australian submarine captain, the question is how long does the Southern Hemisphere, will it survive? And if it won't, how long till the fallout kind of claims their lives? At the end of that semester, after doing all the research and buying all the books, Amazon started recommending self-help books, get yourself out of depression workbooks. The following semester, so fall of my third year in seminary, I took a class on the book of Job. And at the end of that semester, Amazon started recommending suicide prevention camps. So the great algorithm of the sky thought that I was into some really worrying stuff because I was, the algorithm thought he's reading too much Scripture and he thinks the world is going to end. We got to get this kid some help.
But they didn't call the hotline for you.
They didn't do that. So,
Okay.
but as somebody who spent an entire semester on the book of Job, I've got a few bones to pick about the book's, how it represents Job. First, the adversary, I think what they were trying to do was avoid a lot of associations that may not be particularly helpful. Accuser is a far better term, but the name of the person, the accuser, is not Satan as in the kind of the devil, but the Satan. So think of this as God's district attorney. So when we say the accuser, this is the person who is, the Satan is a member of the heavenly court on God's side. And so it's somebody who kind of presses charges on humanity. The other thing I will say, which I think makes the story even more troubling, is the debate over Job's piety isn't philosophical, which I kind of think is kind of the tone we get. God is placing a wager. He is betting on Job's response. So when we hear the story about how robbers come and steal his property, how a windstorm kills, I think, all 6 of Job's children. This is so that God can settle a bet. And it makes the story that much more unsettling. What the story does get right, but what I want to highlight too is for 36 chapters, so from chapter 3 until chapter 38, Job is demanding an audience with God. I have been perfect. This is utter nonsense that I have been punished. I have been perfect. God, you owe me an explanation as to why all this bad stuff happened, because you're not supposed to allow this bad stuff to happen, because I have been ritually perfect.
He's been good.
God says, I don't care. You know, oops, I got to hit play, sorry. God comes to Job in the whirlwind, and he basically says, listen, kid, the things that I have to deal with, I have to pull Orion's belt across the night sky. I have to store up the wind and the snow and the mountains and decide when to let them go. There are monsters in the sea that need to be fed. Leviathan, by the way, is the name for a hippopotamus. So don't think that there's this like giant kraken that God is feeding. It's a hippopotamus, which is, I think, the funniest thing in the world that God worries about hippopotami. But basically, God says, I don't care. But at the end of the story, he reverses Job's fortunes. His money, his livestock, his children are all kind of returned to him. It's a fascinating book. One of these days we'll do a tour through the book of Job. It ends with, and this is what the book gets absolutely correct. God gets upset with everybody who said that Job wasn't perfect. They were wrong about God. God does allow bad things to happen to good people. And so he gives Job the opportunity to pray for them so that his vengeance would kind of, his friends would be spared God's vengeance. One of my favorite reactions to the book of Job is a short play by Robert Frost, who imagined the 43rd chapter to the book of Job, where God offers Job an apology of sorts. And this is one of my favorite, I've actually memorized it. I love it so much. I hope you realize by now the part you played to stultify the Deuteronomists and to change the tenor of religious thought. My thanks are to you for releasing me from the moral bondage to the human race. What Job gives us is an ability to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? What it also does is it immediately forces us to stop blaming people for bad situations. God does not give cancer to mean people. Tragedy befalls us not because we sinned, but because sometimes bad things just happen. And I think that Job kind of breaks this open. And for people who are running around saying, oh, no, God doesn't punish the innocent, all we have to do is point to Good Friday. Bad things do happen to innocent and good people. And so we have to immediately question any association that we would make between bad things and sinfulness. A year ago, I came across a wonderful, fantastic quote that really helped me kind of get my head around the ramifications of sin. Because what we want to avoid is the idea that we are punished for our sins. right? You were selfish, God's gonna send you a flat tire and a $700, retreading bill, right? That's not how God works. But sometimes we are punished by our own sins. But that's a really significant detail. We are punished by our sins, not for our sins. That when we are selfish, sometimes the fruits of that selfishness comes back to bite us in the rear end. And so it was a wonder, it was such a gift to read that in some sermon prep last year, that sin doesn't just kind of happen in isolation. And sin can kind of continue to affect us in negative ways, but it is not God intended. I think that's the most significant thing I want to take away from our study of the book of Job. The other thing that I kind of want to bring to our attention is this idea of everything happens for a reason. I want to divide that question in two for a second. There is nothing, there is nothing that is more spiritually poisonous than the phrase, God won't give you anything you can't handle.
Yeah.
If you ever hear someone say that, please shut them up. And I mean that. What we're basically, and this is, people mean well, but it places a guilt on you that is impossible to carry. My aunt was killed by a drunk driver the week before Christmas when I was in 5th grade. And people tried to say the nice things, and a lot of them said, God won't give you, and these are 5th graders, right? So let's not be too hard on them. But a bunch of 5th graders were repeating things they had probably heard from their parents. God won't give you anything more than you can handle. My response to that was, oh, good. My hubris got my aunt killed. If I was a little bit weaker, God wouldn't have killed my aunt because I wouldn't have been able to handle it. Mm-hmm. That is the weight we're putting on people when we say, God won't give you more than you can handle. So please, please, for your rector, don't ever say it. It's a slightly different flavor, but I don't think it comes with as many negative connotations. But what's really interesting to me is many of us believe that we are agents of free will, that we can make decisions, we can choose the left fork of the road or the right fork of the road, that we have free will. When we are future oriented, we have free will. When strange things happen in our lives that we didn't really care for and didn't particularly like at the moment, but we find out where it led us, we then start to use the phrase, everything happens for a reason. And so it's this weird thing of we think our past was fated to bring us to this moment, but our free will into the future remains. And so my question is, do we find the notion that everything happens for a reason to be comforting or troubling? Because I think that many of us, I think where this comes out, where I see this a lot is, it's the silver lining argument, right? A loved one dies, but then that brings about some positive change or some new direction in our life. Whether it's didn't get into the college of our dreams, a divorce, there's 1,000 different we didn't get the job we wanted, right? This happened in my own family, right? So Christy was up for the job of superintendent in our home district. They went with a different candidate, and it was awful. And it felt like rejection, and it felt just awful. was that the first nudge that would start the Warren family being open to possibly leaving Quincy? Does everything happen for a reason?
That's a good question.
You know, these are the kinds of things that we, you know, and there were there were like 20 other things that happened that got us from Abby is in high school, thou shalt not move your teenage children in the middle of high school. It's like the 12th commandment. To maybe this could be a good thing. But it ain't gonna be easy. But maybe it could be for the best. I'm gonna zip my lips for a moment and turn to the group. Do we find the phrase "everything happens for a reason" convincing, comforting, troubling, all of the above, a little bit at different times in our lives? Juan has got his hand up, so let's.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, I'm good at avoiding the question, but
Okay.
there's a school of thought within law enforcement that believes there's no such thing as a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. So within law enforcement, it's a truth.
Mhm.
Now, does that make it comforting? Maybe. Does that make it uncomfortable? I mean, does it make it troubling? It's both.
Okay.
You know the truth, and the truth shall rule. Deal with it.
Okay. So Juan says both. What are some other thoughts
I
on?
sort of believe in that.
Okay.
I do. Like I've mentioned to you before, we had to move, you know, with the company and everything. And I've moved my older son. He always, you know, teenage years. My husband would always leave and go with him, and they'd set up a camp in a motel, and that introduced him to the school. He was a sports guy. He got on the teams when he got there. It was good for him. And I think, you know, I think you try to have children grow up with some backbone, at least I think so. That's my way of raising children. It's too easy to not to demand a few things like that from them. So to me, it's not, it was trouble in a way. Of course it was trouble, and you worried. Yes, I worried. But I could see where it was good for him. It was good for him to be with his dad, to be introduced to new people, to get on with his life.
Yeah.
I don't.
Sorry to share again. I wonder how much of my life was dictated by the fact that I chose a college because it had unlimited soft serve.
Soft serve.
Frozen yogurt.
Oh, I hope not, Matt.
It was one of like the three reasons I chose the college I did. But the college I went to not only gave me my life, it gave me my wife.
So there's a reason for.
God wired me to love soft serve and root beer floats. And eventually God would give me a family by virtue of my love of soft serve.
We all have so many decisions to make in life.
Yeah.
Do you make the right decision? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but.
Yeah, you had your hand raised.
So I think one, if you use about law enforcement, I'm gonna equate that also with science. You know, science says things happen for a reason. I agree with that. But I think the phrase is often used as a piece of condolence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, it all happens for a reason. And then I think then just becomes a throwaway phrase because you don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
You can make it something, but then again, it requires your personal action. So if something bad happens,
Yeah.
telling me it happened for a reason isn't going to move me in any direction.
Right.
But if I myself say, okay, this has happened, what am I gonna make of it?
Yeah.
That gives it the reason. Well, reason, that gives it that brings purpose,
Okay.
meaning,
Yeah, I just,
Dive.
I think, for me, it's about acceptance.
Okay.
And that, because I think the biggest example that I always think about is it's raining today I don't like it raining today. Like I plan to do something and it's raining and I might not be able to do whatever it was I planned to do. But I can't change the weather, can't make it not rain. So then when I get to accept the circumstance, because I have no power to change that circumstance. If it was supposed to be sunny that day, it would have been. It wasn't. So, you know, when I can accept it, then I wear the right clothes, I can go out and I can enjoy being in the rain maybe if I have my wellies on or whatever else. But I think, and it doesn't mean put up with.
Well,
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah, so if I don't accept it, then I can't deal with the situation in hand. So by accepting this is what you have, this is, and I don't agree with it and I don't like it, then I can say maybe what can I do about it? And I might get some steps where I could take some action. It might be I do need to do something about it. But that immediate gives me a lot of comfort actually when I look at this insanity that's going on around us in the world right now.
Yeah.
When I can come back and say, this must be happening for a reason, or it would be something different.
Yeah, I mean, for me, crummy things are the opportunity for care. And so it reframes suffering as an opportunity for care. And so when we see bad things happen, it's the Mr. Rogers approach to trauma, right? We can look at the tragedy, and this is close to what Pat was saying earlier, or we can look at the people who are rushing in to help, right? I mean, that's kind of where we were post 9/11. That's where we were in COVID, banging our pots and pans Friday nights at 9 p.m., right? We were trying to find hope in, not in the tragedy, but in the response to the tragedy. And I think that's also kind of our Christian perspective, which is, you know, again, we look to, tragedy isn't the end of the story. I mean, that is a fundamental Christian bedrock belief. Tragedy is not the end of the story. It won't be. We believe in a God of transformation. We look to an instrument of capital torture and capital punishments and say that's our symbol for everlasting life, right? I mean, that's what God can do. Is like, here is, I mean, the modern equivalent of the crucifix is an electric chair, right? How many of us would wear an electric chair around our necks? But you want to talk about cruel ways to kill somebody? Yeah. But God isn't going to let that be the last word. You know, that's kind of what, and we heard from her last week, and I quoted her in my sermon on Sunday. You know, that was Julian of Norwich's take, is all shall be well. That's what God's job is, to make it well. So
It's not what happens to you in this life. There's a couple of phrases that I've hung around my neck. And one is, it's not what happens to you in this life. It's your attitude about what happens.
What to do with
And a crisis can be an opportunity in a storm. So I had to say that to myself many times, that I was in a serious depression for a lot of years.
yeah.
But I wanted to get my head screwed on straight. And I said, I will get my head screwed on straight. And that's my attitude. I am going to do this.
Yeah. Before we turn our attention to the last chapter in the section, chapter 12, any thoughts from folks online about everything happens for a reason? No? Okay, great. Well, so Linda, say that one line. I had a turn of phrase in my head, but now I lost it.
Which
It was something cute about it's not the problem with this life.
It's not what happens to you in this life, it's your attitude
Okay.
about it.
What do you do with that?
I would offer a addendum, a corollary to that is this life is preparing us for the next one. And so let's look at when it ends. We've got 4 different theories. Let me share my screen. We've got 4 different theories about the purpose or what the purpose of death, or what death can help illumine for us. So Socrates believed that the philosophical life is training for death. This is the kind of bipart. It's preparing the soul to be separated from the body. Nat Han has a cheerful unconcern for death, arguing that we are a continuous fluid process of manifestations arising and then yielding to other manifestations. There's a great video clip I might pull up real quickly to help illustrate that. Hagelin's conclusion is this: what I do and what I love can matter to me only because I understand myself to be mortal. So Hagelin was kind of brought to us as the counter voice to the transhumanist movement of kind of moving humanity towards an immortal state, kind of held up by a merging with technology. Have any of you seen the TV show or the series Upload on Amazon?
No.
Okay. It's a very funny, quirky show. It imagines there's this company that allows you to upload your consciousness before death so that you live in a virtual world and can be visited by your living relatives in a virtual reality state. One of my mentors believed wholeheartedly that death is the cure for sin. That for a Christian, the way to stop sinning from happening is to experience death and resurrection. Upload is the perfect example of why living forever just continues. It just keeps making problems because we keep sinning. It's a quirky but also a really interesting show. So I won't say I recommend it, but I would love to talk to you about it at a coffee hour. Choose to watch it. It's on Amazon. Which brings us to Paul. Paul's view of death is an affirmation of life, right? God has from the very beginning been the God who makes alive. God created humans and other creatures as living beings, and the life is still the hallmark of God's work. Jesus Christ is to be known primarily as life-giving. Bringing life to others is just what Jesus does. What's more, God's life-giving work takes place here in this world because the life-giving God is the God of this world. This world and this life are not way stations as we pass on to a hereafter. And that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit last week, is a lot of popular culture gets the Christian understanding of what death is absolutely wrong. If you look at the end of Revelation, the whole point of resurrection is we are restored to a resurrected body with God here on earth. We don't get to trash the planet and then say, it's okay, I'm going to go live on a cloud in outer space, because that's making God's job harder to resurrect this world, right? It immediately bears us and gives us a responsibility towards ecology and to one another. We're trying to make, C.S. Lewis puts it perfectly, right? Earth can either be the outer neighborhood or just another neighborhood in hell, or it can be the outermost boundary of heaven. Our job is to make Earth look a little bit more like a suburb of heaven than downtown hell. The book says this, and I think this is kind of where we want to end, and I don't want to stand up, so I'll get to him in a moment. The book suggests this: if you know what's worth dying for, then you'll know what kind of life is truly worth living. But the other way around, if you can't answer the question of what is worth dying for, then perhaps you might not really have a vision of a life worth living. And this one I think would be helpful to discuss with a partner instead of as the whole group. Can we think of anything worth dying for?
I think of the military.
Okay.
Immediately. I mean, people put their lives on the line.
Yep.
For what or for whom?
Yeah.
Law enforcement.
Yeah.
And law enforcement, that includes them, absolutely.
So, does knowing what's worth dying for give us an understanding of what really matters? So, let's turn to a partner and let's take about maybe 3-4 minutes to discuss. Does knowing what is worth dying for help us know what is worth living for? So, and I will stop my share, and we'll send you guys to some breakout rooms.
So.
Well, yeah,
Nice chat.
Then the only question is, when do you get resurrected? In other words, when do you die? Does that matter?
Right?
Yeah.
But I don't want my body across the street.
Jump through it.
Yeah, yeah.
Get hit in the car, their life is worth living for.
So, but does that
Freedom.
qualify? I get, yes. I just
Worth dying?
If you don't have a doctor, I think they should work on that. So,
To have your soul resurrected?
I should live a better life.
Like my friend's family,
That makes me think of that.
It won't hurt to live a better life.
Jewish
Does that have any?
The ocean there is goes to save them, and they understand they could die in the process. Your family, they should understand.
I served in the military and we were to protect this country.
Think about the firemen and the police.
But your soul will be with God.
So let's take about minute and a half left. About 90 seconds left.
Okay.
I guess you.
What's the copy? Is it just out?
Yeah. And I think Matt said, Matt, didn't you say you know one of these professors that wrote?
Yeah, Miroslav Volf is the professor of mine, yeah.
Both.
So to be
But you're not alone.
Oh, no, I'm not.
You were alone with that book.
Oh, I just want to take that on. Yeah, I have to listen to them explain everything. I mean, you know, we all know what agency it is, right? I can't think of the name of the hospital. Matt came to this word agency. But I just explains it.
St. Jude, St. Jude.
So there's responsibility that goes along with it.
Well, that's part of the.
You were asking.
So as a host, I know you guys were having a good conversation because nobody came back to the main room early. So
Whoa, you cut us off. We were having a great conversation.
I apologize. I'm feeling, to go back to our chapter 9 discussion, I'm feeling guilty about going so over last week. But I'm going to end this.
Well, that's all right.
That's okay. It was good.
All right. So for those of you guys online, what is considering what is worth dying for illustrative? Does it help us know what's worth living for?
Okay.
It didn't really help me, Matt. I don't know. I was in the Army, and I suppose they talked about what you're dying for, and you kind of agreed to it, but I don't think I ever fully signed on, and because I was in the peacetime Army, I never had to put it to test. So I don't know that I've given it much thought, and I'm 81 years old. I was thinking more about some of the things in Revelation, and also about what the Apostle Paul said in the resurrection of the body. I've never really viewed it quite the way that you described it before the break. And I'm not sure I agree with the way you interpreted Paul in terms of the resurrection.
Say more.
I don't know. I mean,
Paul and I are uneasy.
You're a theologian. I'm not. I'm a
Well,
layperson. I admire Paul. I think that he clearly was dedicated and fervent, and you know that he had to believe. He saw some things that we haven't seen. So I'm always interested in what he has to say. But
yeah,
we do say in our Apostles' Creed that we believe in the resurrection of the body.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, so yeah, I would affirm Paul's and Revelation are both confirming a resurrection of the body.
Uh-huh.
But I think the tricky thing is that the only body we really have scriptural guidance towards is Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And his resurrected body doesn't obey a lot of laws of physics.
Uh-huh.
So both in the Gospel of John, and we're really familiar with this because we hear it the Sunday after Easter every single year, right? Jesus walks through locked doors twice. He's able to conceal his appearance on the road to Emmaus. He disappears without a trace from the inn in Emmaus, and shows up in Jerusalem a moment later.
Right, and he told Mary not to touch him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I think most of the New Testament affirms a resurrection of the body, but it doesn't help clarify what that actually means in my
Right. Well, I think for a number of years, for sure, the Catholic Church did not allow cremation because of that. And even now, I don't think it's favored.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't think that most Protestant denominations, most people now are cremated, certainly in California.
Yeah, and so and I think that's where it leads us to the question of is God's plan for humanity and for creation, does our understanding of physics disallow God from reconstituting our bodies?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the problem with physics is we cannot, at least in our current understanding, create matter. Right? So there are carbon atoms in my body that used to be carbon atoms of somebody else's body, or part of a tree or a forest, or right? Like there's we're all stardust. And so, but am I going to get to heaven with only like 13% of my body because those are the only atoms that God could reconstitute me from, because the rest of my body was also being used by somebody else's atoms, like, and I don't mean to make light of it, but at some point I hit what my friend lovingly refers to the I believe button. When it comes to the resurrection, I believe God will make it happen. I don't understand how it will work, but and that's what I do for almost all of Paul. Is just I believe Paul. So Paul ruined a lot of.
You would have to believe him because he wrote so much of the New Testament. Otherwise, you're in the wrong business.
Well, Paul ruined just about every party I went to in seminary. So I was dating Christy long distance, so I didn't have to chase romantic interests in seminary, which meant I was stuck. I also was one of the few people who knew how to tap a keg. And so I was stuck at the keg for most parties, and that left me wide open to law students and everybody else confusing me with Paul and arguing like why Paul was wrong to me is like, I'm not Paul. I didn't write that. So Paul and I don't always get along well, but he did have some nice things to say. So
He said them nicely. Let's leave it there.
Well, I'll take almost all of Romans and like 7/8 of 1 Corinthians and be happy. Everything else, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but some of it is more interesting for the history of the early church than it is for right now. So.
But you haven't left out one thing that I was reading in there is forget about the body.
Yeah.
They talk about the soul.
Yeah.
The soul is don't worry about your body.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah.
Because you know what, growing up, Episcopalian too, I just couldn't believe, I could not believe if everybody went to heaven that deserved to go to heaven, that I was taught. There's not enough room. How much room is there up there? I mean, really, as a young child, it's very hard for them to think that there's people up there walking around. I don't see them. And I think about that occasionally too, and I'm not a child anymore.
Well, and that's the beauty of hitting the I believe button is you just trust that
Faith.
God knows what God is up to and knows what God is doing and
That's faith.
yeah.
That's a definition to me.
There are problems above my pay grade as an Episcopal priest, and that is one of them.
So you can imagine what our pay grade is.
Anybody else about does knowing what's dying for teach us about what's living for or what's worth living for?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what you just started to say.
We were talking about that. For me, it's personal in relationship to why I'm here, why
Okay.
I'm in California. It relates back to the issue of my son, who is gone, and I only have my daughter and granddaughter, and really we came for them. And so for me, as we've been going through this week after week, there's been a lot of thought about, what is life worth living? And it is for me, they are worth living.
Good old what's it thing.
But definitely, and so when I ask myself the question, what would I die for? I would die for any one of them. So I think there's a connection for me, at least. I really feel very strongly about that. I wouldn't hesitate. So I see the connection.
Yep.
I think for me, so I'll echo George. I never served in the armed forces, but I've never really been put to the tests. There's one time I came close to being put to the test of what am I willing to die for. But I think the other way to ask the question is, and I always go back to 9/11 and to the people on the planes who knew they were going to die.
Yeah.
And so to me, the question of what is worth dying for may be instructive But I think the question of if we knew we just had a few minutes to live, what message would we share? Really gets to what's worth living for. And I think that, it very obviously becomes, family becomes formative, but I think if we believe that God is love, and when we know that the end is coming, our immediate response is we have to let the people we love know that we love them. Really strikes me as what is worth living for. It gets right to the heart of what I believe. We are put on this earth to demonstrate love and to show that love. And when we know that there isn't anything left, we do anything we can to make sure that the people we love know that. And I think that, for those of us who have been with loved ones near the end of their lives, there's 1,000 different ways to tell this story, and we've heard over the course of our life scores of these stories that are always heartbreaking, but always affirming this understanding that we are here to love people. I think that, for me, that gets us back to the question. And I think that's where I wanted to end today, which is it worth adding what is worth dying for is that a new good formulation to the question? And I'll share the screen for our friends online. Or what would we want people to know in our last breaths? Is that another way? Right? Because I can guarantee you what we want people to know with our last breath is not going to be complex moral philosophy. I just know it. But I do think it really does. It really does help us center and focus on what's important. One more show recommendation for you. Did anyone watch the show The Good Place?
Yeah.
On NBC? Okay. The Good Place imagines something like heaven, right? And so when you die, or during your earthly life, you score points based on kind of common ethics, right? And so if you are French, it's immediate 1,000 points negative. It's a fantastic joke for an Anglophile. Yeah, but anyway, there's thousands of ways to earn points. But what happens? This show is about someone who accidentally was a real jerk in real life, should have been sent to the bad place, finds herself in the good place, and so she then has to decide if she can fake it to become a good person. It's absolutely fascinating. It ends with one of the characters is a moral philosophy professor, and he ends with a very Buddhist approach to life, which is, think of a water droplet in a wave, right? The wave forms, it has a body, you can see it, measure it, it goes on, and then it returns to the ocean. It was always part of the ocean, but because of impermanence, right, it just changes forms. It's another one of those examples of if we just have a few more breaths to live, what is worth sharing with the people we love? Maybe it's we're not alone. Maybe it's the message of we're never really gone. There's 1,000 ways to formulate those messages, but maybe they help us identify what is a life worth living for. So, 2 minutes over doesn't feel as egregious as last week. So what I love about this, so next week will be our final gathering. We're gonna go, returning to the metaphor from first chapters, we're gonna work our way back up to the surface. And this is going to be our opportunity to kind of reflect on our Lenten journey. We've thought about our values, we've thought about the need and the role of repentance in our lives. I'm thrilled that we end this class as we prepare for Easter. How do we lead a new, joyful life that reflects the gift that has been given to us in the resurrection? And so that's kind of where we'll point our compass and orient ourselves towards next week. And so it'll be our last gathering for the class, and from there we'll launch in, and hopefully you guys will, next week we'll also kind of, there'll be an opportunity to share some feedback so that I can see what I might be able to do better or what you guys might want to learn about in a future class here at St. Stephen's. So I'm going to say, I don't want to be the last word. Are there any kind of closing thoughts today on tonight's, oh yeah, sorry, one, I didn't get back to you. Yeah.
Me and my big mouth.
No. Not compared to me, sir.
There's scripture, there's a passage, if I recall, that implies that only Jesus is perfect.
Yeah.
If we are resurrected, are we perfect? And if so, maybe that's reason worth dying.
Yeah. That certainly is close to what my mentor said about resurrection is how we kind of are refined out of our sinful state and finally get to live perfect.
Two other quick thoughts. I'm going to Google the distinction between St. Peter and the Satan, see where they rank one another.
Okay.
And I was driving here and I was listening to the Metropolitan Opera production of Romeo and Juliet, which always struck me as a tragedy, but listening to it was beautiful.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all for your attention, your participation. I really appreciate it. For those who are online, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
So I hope was it, for those of you online, was it easier to hear today?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
And the Zoom camera is great too, so we can see who's in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great setup now. Very nice.
Great. Sounds good. Well, getting better every week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.